Hey, Bold New Crew. So today we're going to talk about Supabase versus Firebase. What are the key differences between them, the pros, the cons, and which one you should use for your projects and why? Now, I'm going to tell you up front that you should be working with Firebase, and in this episode, we're going to talk about why. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong if you want to build your apps and your products with Supabase. It is a great product, it's an incredible product. It has a very beautiful and easy to use UI, user interface. But the main issue I have with Supabase is its pricing and business model. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And while some people might shrug this off as not too important or irrelevant, I actually think it's totally the opposite. It is very important and actually quite relevant. And the reason is because it relates to money and to the costs associated to your business and to your maintenance and operational cost of you standing up different applications and different products as you continue on your journey of building new products and new apps using Bolt New. Now, I should also share that I started actually building with Supabase. So I actually know the product quite well. And then I shifted into and moved into Firebase. And I'm glad I did. And the only regret I actually have about this is not starting with Firebase in the first place. And the reason why I started with Supabase is because I wasn't really across any of these two products before. So I actually just learned about them shortly after Bolt New launched, and I was looking into which applications and which tools I could use to set up a database, to incorporate authentication into my applications and into my products. And while I was doing this research, I came across both Supabase and Firebase. And I did something that I would normally and typically do, which is I just jumped to ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT to do a comparative analysis between these two products and to give me a recommendation of which one to use. Now, ironically, ChatGPT didn't recommend one over the other, but it was very good at explaining to me the differences between them and which one I should choose and why, like which one suited which type of builder. So basically you had different, scenarios or features and functionality and characteristics of both of these products, which would suit more, an entrepreneur or over the other, a builder over the other. And basically, I guess the key thing that ChatGPT highlighted for me around Firebase is that Firebase is a Google-owned product. And therefore, it is kind of tied to the Google ecosystem. So from my research, it sounded like Supabase was a little bit more open and, more in a way, just not tied to a particular just ecosystem like Firebase with Google, but a little bit more open. So I could see that both had kind of like very similar characteristics. You could use them for pretty much the same thing, but they do have some, technical differences between them. And I'm happy to share a link to that technical information that I found when I did my research on ChatGPT, so you can read more about it. I'm not going to go too much into the technical differences between the two products, but basically what I want to highlight for you is that they both kind of do the same thing, just in a different way and with a different type of technology, a different type of underlying technology. But you can use both to create your database for your Bolt New application, to set up authentication, to set up email notifications, such as, for example, email confirmation when a user signs up, etc. But like I said, initially I opted for Supabase from the research that I did and from the information that I found using ChatGPT, which, like I said, I'm happy to share the link in this episode so you can go into that and review it yourself. And in that link that I'm going to share, you're going to see that I actually talk about this and say that I'm very transparent and honest about it and say that I actually originally started with Supabase. And then I give a couple of updates as to why I shifted to Firebase. And this, by the way, is one of the most frequently asked questions about Bolt New and about building with Bolt New. Which product you should use for setting up your database and authentication? Should you use Firebase or should you use Supabase? I'm sure there are other products beyond these two, but generally those are the two that come up, and generally those are kind of like the market leading products, which is why most people consider one or the other. and which is why I was in that position myself when I started. But what I want to share with you today is why you should use Firebase instead of Supabase. Now, most people, I think, I haven't seen specific stats around this, but from what I'm seeing on different communities and different channels, I am pretty sure that probably around 80 to 90% of people building apps with Bolt New are using Supabase instead of Firebase. So the remaining 10 to 20% of people are using Firebase like me. So if you're following the herd, or if you're just swimming, just going with the flow of the river and where everyone is kind of going, then you would go with Supabase. But today I'm going to make a very compelling case and a very compelling argument as to why actually you should not follow the herd on this one, and you should actually swim upstream, in the opposite direction where everyone else is swimming, right? And there are very good reasons about this and for doing this. Now let's go back to the story of how I started with Supabase and what I encountered when I was working with Supabase. The first thing I will say is one of the reasons why I chose also Supabase, aside from the research that I mentioned that I did with ChatGPT, was because I came across this video from Sensei Tyler, which is one of the key engineers at Supabase, who had made this really cool video that showed how you could connect Supabase with Bolt New in just a few seconds. And I was mind blown with that video from Sensei Tyler. By the way, I have a lot of respect for Sensei Tyler and the people who work at Supabase. Like I said before, don't get me wrong with anything on this episode. It is a great product, it is a great company, and it has a very incredible team behind it. People like Sensei Tyler and people like Paul, the CEO, are people I have a lot of respect for as founders, as builders, as people who contribute to the community. So I came across this video from Sensei Tyler, and in his video, like I said, he just was able to connect Supabase with Bolt in a few seconds. So I just took that video and I did the same. At the time, of course, we didn't have the current integration that Bolt New has with Supabase, which you can connect, kind of like the two applications with just a click of a button. At the time when Bolt New launched, this didn't exist. So I didn't even have the option that now you have and that now builders have to connect Bolt New and Supabase with the click of a button. But connecting Supabase with Bolt New using kind of like the old school manual way that Sensei Tyler covered in his video was actually quite simple. Like it only took me a few seconds to get it done. And again, this is coming from someone who is not a technical person. I'm not a technical, I'm not a developer or a technical person. I'm more of a business type of entrepreneur. And I'd never used Supabase before. And I had very recently started to use Bolt New. So I was still very much in the learning process and in the learning journey. And I still found very easy to connect Supabase with Bolt New. And my first impressions of Supabase were also incredibly good. I was able to, sync the database between the application and Supabase. I could see that when I made changes in the application, the changes were reflected in the database. I could see that when users entered data, it was flowing into the database. If they were making updates to the data, if they were removing data, I could see that the integration between the two was working really well. Now, the other thing that I really liked about Supabase when I started working with it was that the interface was pretty much self-explanatory, very well designed. So, you had things like tables. You click on tables, it showed you tables. And for authentication, it was also very straightforward and very easy to set up authentication using Supabase. So you just went to they had a settings for this, and you could enable email and password to set up your authentication for your application. Very straightforward, pretty easy to do, and pretty easy to use. Now, here on the topic of authentication, I started to notice one thing that is actually quite different in Firebase and that I think is way better in Firebase than in Supabase. When you're doing authentication in Supabase, you have to connect a third-party provider such as Resend or Mailgun, one of those, applications that sends emails, so that when your users sign up, Supabase actually sends the emails to those users. The confirmation email that they have to click on and they just confirm their account. Very typical, very classic, sign up process when you're signing up to any application or any product. So Supabase, from what I read in their documentation, originally didn't have this. So you could like actually do the email sending directly from Supabase, but for some reason they removed it. I can't remember why, but they explained that in their knowledge base, in their documentation. And now currently, if you want to send emails, like I said, confirmation emails when users sign up to your application, which is very typical and very common, you would have to go through the process of setting up Mailgun or something like Mailgun or Resend, etc. Now, it is not hard to set up Mailgun, for example. I didn't have a great experience with Resend, although a lot of people use Resend. I didn't really like it too much. But yeah, it's not hard to set up this in either Resend or Mailgun, but it takes time and it requires multiple steps to go through this so that you can actually send emails when people sign up and register to your application. Now, like I said, even though this isn't something that is difficult or complex to do, it requires effort and it requires time, and it's just an additional layer of complexity, an additional thing you need to do, an additional friction that you don't have with Firebase. For example, with Firebase, when you set up user authentication and your sign up workflow and process, when users sign up and register to your application, if you are using Firebase, you won't need to set up things like Mailgun or Resend, at least not for authentication. It comes out of the box with Firebase. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to configure anything. You don't need to set up anything. It just kind of knows that it needs to send the email, and it just sends the email. You do need to tell BoltNew when you're prompting BoltNew to set up authentication, to send a confirmation email when a user signs up. But that's it. Aside from telling that prompt to BoltNew, there's nothing else you need to do. You don't need to go to Mailgun or Resend or one of those email sending applications. Like Firebase does that by default. By the way, all of these other applications like Resend and Mailgun, they have a free tier, but if you are getting a lot of users, they also start charging you, which again doesn't happen with Firebase. With Firebase, there are no costs associated to them sending an email for a user registration, and there are it just doesn't work like it works with Mailgun and with Supabase. So this was one of the key differences that I started noticing between Firebase and Supabase. Now, the other big thing for me, or the other key thing that kind of led to me actually starting to consider and look into other options, was when I was building my app with BoltNew, I came across this issue where I found that I couldn't delete users from my database in Supabase. So again, I had just set up authentication following Sensei Tyler's video. By the way, Sensei Tyler is someone that works at Supabase. He's one of the key engineers at Supabase. So obviously, I just followed best practice, right? Because he actually works there. And it didn't work out of the box for me. I couldn't delete users from the database in Supabase. And I found this really annoying, incredibly annoying, because I was doing testing. And obviously, I don't have 1,000 email accounts to test things. So I was using my own or my team's, email accounts to do some testing. I have a few email accounts, and there's a couple from our team as well, but I don't have hundreds, or it's just a couple of them, a handful of them. So when as I was doing my testing and I needed to test more, in my mind, what I thought is, I'll add an email address, then remove it from the database, and then test again with the same email address, which is very, sounds very simple and probably is very simple, but I couldn't do that, and I couldn't get that done with Supabase. It just didn't work out of the box for me. So I came across this issue where it was completely impossible to remove users from the database. Now, I don't know if you understand what that means, but to me, this is like a big problem. Like, I don't want to have users in my database that I can't remove if for whatever reason I want to remove them or take them out of my database. And like I said, if I'm doing testing, I want to be able to do testing by myself very quickly and be able to remove users and use the same email address, etc. So I found this really annoying, and I went to the Supabase support team, and it was like a back and forth process of getting, going through emails. They're not very fast at responding to emails, by the way. There were times where they took 3-4 days to get back to me to an email. And I think the fastest probably was like 8 hours or something like that. But I wasn't super impressed with the responsiveness and the response times. On the plus side, there is like a human element, and they do have a support team. And when they do reply with useful information generally, and they seem to be very, eager to help. With Google, it's a bit different because Google is very, Google is shitty at customer support and customer service, basically because they pretty much don't have any customer support or any customer service. They rely on these like community forums or self-help articles, which are okay, but are not always great. And sometimes you do want to have like someone to talk to and someone you can reach out to. And anyway, Google doesn't have that, and Supabase does, which is good, like I said, but with the caveat, like I mentioned, that the support team at Supabase is not the most responsive team. So I messaged them, and in the end, they can't find, after some back and forth on them asking me more information, asking me to test other things, to try to delete the users in another way, to send them screenshots, etc. They realized I couldn't delete users. So they told me in the end that I should migrate the database across into another database. And I thought, fuck, I've already set up this project. I've already set up the database. I've already set up the connection with Bolt New. And now these people are asking me to migrate and shift everything into a new database. And they came back to me with this link to their documentation. And at a glance, it looked very simple. They said, look, this is very easy. You just need to migrate your database to a new database, and then you'll be able to, to keep building your app. And I thought, okay, this is annoying, but okay, I'll do it if this will resolve the process. And then I started going through their documentation, and this 6-step process, which at a glance looks very easy. If you go to their website and to their knowledge base and you ask, database migration, you'll see it. It looks like a very simple, easy to use 6-step process. But then when you actually get into the details and you actually start going through those 6 steps, it's not actually 6 steps, but it turns into like 50 steps. And it requires highly technical knowledge to get through these, 50 steps, because it involves things like downloading things on your computer, like software on your computer. It involves things like running scripts on your terminal. So things that are heavily, that I would consider completely technical and that I actually hate. I don't really like doing this type of stuff at all. And like I said, I'm not a developer, but I gave it a go because they told me this would resolve it, right? So I tried to follow their 60-step process and spent hours. I probably stayed one day until like 2, 3 a.m. trying to get this shit done. And I couldn't get it done. I probably got to step like 58, like 49, like almost till the end. There was probably like 1 or 2 steps missing, but I still couldn't get it done. And I found it incredibly frustrating and annoying. And I was using ChatGPT to kind of give me ideas or help me or re-explain to me, and Claude re-explain to me how to do these steps so I could actually get it done. And I just couldn't get it done, okay? And by the way, even though I'm not a technical person, I am an engineer and I have 2 MBAs. So I wouldn't categorize myself as someone with low IQ or, that couldn't follow instructions. But like I said, this is not actually an easy thing to do, at least not for a non-dev. Maybe it is relatively easy for someone if you're like a dev. Maybe migrating the database is probably relatively easy if you're just starting out for a dev. But if you're not a dev, which is the majority of people, the vast majority of people are people like me, so non-devs, I wouldn't recommend this process at all. And I went back to Supabase and I said, look, I haven't been able to go through this process. Can you do it for me? I'll pay you, do it for me. They said they didn't do that kind of thing, so they couldn't do it for me. So they just told me, let's just follow the instructions. So they didn't fix it for me. They said that they didn't know what had caused the issue. I said to them, well, it's out of the box. Like I haven't actually touched anything. I just followed this video from Sensei Tyler, and I don't understand why this isn't working. It's ridiculous. Doesn't make sense. It's just out of the box. I'm just starting to set up a new application. It should work, but it doesn't, right? So my experience with Supabase went from being really good at the beginning to quickly souring as I started to see issues like the ones that I've covered already in this episode. And I actually found very frustrating, like I mentioned, that they couldn't solve this issue themselves. They actually couldn't do it. So as I was going through this, I actually had this meeting planned with Eric Simmons, the CEO and co-founder of Bolt New. And we were talking shop and just discussing a ton of different things. And I told him about this issue I was having with Supabase, and Eric recommended that I gave Firebase a go. And he told me he had used Firebase many times, that he really liked it, that he had never actually had to kind of like pay anything for it, which is good. So he told me, just give it a go and see. I think it might be good for you. And I'm glad I listened and took his advice, because it ended up being one of the best things I've ever done since I started building with Bolt New, shifting and working with Firebase. Now, ironically, Eric has actually given the Bolt New team and the Stackblitz team the directive to prioritize the development of Supabase over Firebase. Ironically, like I mentioned, because he actually recommended Firebase to me instead of Supabase. But I think he's doing this because he is thinking about what the majority of people are using, and the majority of people are building with Supabase. So he's thinking, let's prioritize what probably covers the vast majority of people. And that's fair enough, of course, nothing wrong with that. I don't think it's a bad decision or anything like that from Eric. I understand, why he's doing this. It makes sense to me why he's doing it. But obviously, personally, I don't benefit from that decision because I actually would like to have a one-click integration with Firebase, which I don't have at the moment. Having said that, the integration, the setup with Firebase is like Supabase, super simple, very easy to use. A lot of devs and a lot of people like to shit on Firebase, and they like to say that Firebase is trash, it's garbage, it's shit, it's not really good. That is a load of nonsense. Firebase is super easy to use. It is a really good product. It seamlessly and very easily integrates with Google Analytics, with Google reCAPTCHA, and it is very, very easy to set up things in Firebase. And it is logical, you go into Firebase and it says project for a project, it says database for a database, it says authentication for an authentication, it says storage for storage. So it doesn't get any easier than that in my view. It is super easy, super clear, very, very easy to work with Firebase and to set up things in Firebase, contrary to what you'll hear a lot of people say and to what a lot of people say about it. Now, could the UI of Firebase be nicer? Yeah. Could it be better designed, etc.? Yeah, but I could say the same of Supabase as well, even though it's got a great UI. Could it improve? Yeah. But like I said, I'd never used Firebase before. It's the first time I was using Firebase, and I found it very easy to use, very easy to set up. But most importantly, guys, and here's the thing, Firebase actually worked out of the box for me without having to go to any support team, without having to, do any of these things that I was having to do with Supabase, without having to go to Mailgun or another thing to send emails. It just worked. And for things like Google reCAPTCHA, beautiful. For things like Google Analytics, which by the way, a lot of devs also shit on Google Analytics, but it is a great product. It's super good. It's free. You get pretty much any insights you want with Google Analytics, and you even have a mobile app. I use the Google Analytics mobile app all the time, and I love it because I just open the app and I can see the stats, the traffic, and everything going to my websites and to my applications. So highly, highly recommend Firebase over Supabase. Like I mentioned before, it is such a powerful and great product. It is so easy to use. And like I said, going back to my original comment about the key difference between them, the business model, for Firebase, you don't have to pay anything. Like you can set up Firebase and you can set up even on the paid plan of Firebase, you're not going to get charged until you exceed very generous thresholds that Google has set up for Firebase. And even then, you can set up alerts to tell you if you're getting close to, let's say you're going to pay, let's say $25, you can get alerts, and you can set caps and limits on your spend as well, which is really good. So I really like that about Firebase as well. With Supabase, the flip side of Supabase, and here's the thing I hate the most about Supabase, is Supabase charges you $25 per project, per application, per month, right? So imagine if you have, let's just say four apps, and you build 4 apps and you have to set up 4 independent projects with 4, databases, authentication, etc. You're going to be paying $100 per month just to have those 4 applications, even if those applications don't have any data, and even if they don't have any users. Just for having them set up and for you being on the paid plan, you're going to have to pay $100 per month to Supabase for 4 projects. On the flip side with Firebase, that would be 0, because Firebase doesn't charge you if you don't have any users, if you don't have any data, and if you don't have any traffic to your application. And most importantly, it doesn't even charge you until you exceed generous thresholds. So for me, it's like a no-brainer, because when I think about volume And I think any person working with Bold New will eventually end up creating a ton of applications, because this is where we're heading in the world of coding with AI. Everybody's going to be building multiple applications. Firebase is going to be way better for you cost-wise, because you're not going to be charged until you actually have traffic and traction with your applications, which is what you want, right? It makes sense. It is a much better, much fairer business model. On the flip side, like I said, with Supabase, you will be charged from the get-go. Now, they do have a free tier on Supabase, but that free tier does not include backups of your database, and it's restricted and constrained to only 2 projects, so only 2 applications. Once you exceed those 2 applications, or once you turn on, or you want to turn on backups for your database and for your applications, you're going to have to start paying. And for me, if I was building with Supabase, I would start paying from the get-go, because it doesn't really make sense to me that you would not have a backup of your database. Like, you need to have that. Now, on the flip side, again, with Google, you don't get charged for having a backup. With Firebase, you don't get charged for having a backup. You do need to be on the Firebase paid plan to be able to set up backups. But like I said before, when you are on the paid plan of Firebase, you don't get charged, even if you're on the paid plan, until you exceed the thresholds. And I have a couple of applications already with Firebase, and I haven't exceeded the thresholds ever. So again, this goes back to Eric's point around Firebase being a very cost-effective, very good product to work with. Now, the other thing that is really great and really good about Firebase is that it has been in the market way longer than Supabase. So it is a way more mature product, and it has a ton of documentation and a ton of different communities where you can find information about how to set up things with Firebase, a lot of self-help and a lot of knowledge-based articles from Google. And look, don't get me wrong, Supabase also does have some really good documentation and knowledge bases, but Supabase is a much less mature product just because it is a more recent and newer product, okay? Firebase has been around way longer than Supabase, so this also gives Firebase a competitive advantage over Supabase. But like I said, for me, the key thing that differentiates and is much better in Firebase is the cost. And this is very important because as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you always need to think about keeping your costs down. Keep your costs down as much as you can, because that will help you in the long term. And as you scale and grow your company, your business, your products, your applications, keeping your costs down will become increasingly important, because the last thing you want to do is just start paying monthly recurring bills like $100 for having 4 databases for your products when they don't have any traction. That's a perfect classic example of the type of thing you shouldn't be doing as a founder. You should not be paying for things that are not bringing you any value, or that are just sitting there without any data or without any users. So this is the main, I guess, issue I see with Supabase, and why I recommend that you actually work with Firebase. Aside from that, like I mentioned, Firebase just works out of the box. It's very easy to integrate, very easy to use. And you also have the things like I mentioned before, like disaster recovery, backups, and it works seamlessly with Google reCAPTCHA, with Google Analytics, all of these really good things. The signing with Google, by the way. The signing with Google is just like, you just tell Bold New, set up signing with Google. And if you have Firebase set up if you connected your Firebase project with your Bold New project, that's going to happen automatically, magically, and it will be great. It works really, really well. With Supabase, you do also have the option of signing with Google, but because Supabase is not a Google product, you have to go through some additional steps to set that up. And like I said before, I see that as an additional step, an additional hassle I have to deal with. And I always recommend to people, remove friction, remove hassle, remove steps as much as you can. By the way, I also remembered another thing that I had problems with Supabase. Supabase has this option, and also Firebase, of course, of magic links, which is that link that when you sign in, you click on it and then you can continue to your application. Magic links also didn't work for me out of the box with Supabase. And when I reached out to Supabase about this magic links issue, they told me that it's actually a known issue. They've documented the issue, but they haven't solved the issue, which is, why have the magic link option if it doesn't even work properly? Makes no sense to me. And the argument of the known issue that they had is kind of like, if your email is filtering emails that you receive, then it counts as if you had clicked on the email, even if you actually haven't. So in my mind, when they gave me this explanation, I'm talking about the Supabase support team, I was thinking, well, that's going to happen all the time, right? Like all email providers now, they scan emails before they actually hit the inbox, and it's just not going to work. And that's exactly what I saw in practice. It just didn't work for me again. Now, to be fair, I haven't actually tested the magic link thing in Firebase because I ended up thinking later on, why even bother to set up magic links? I just want to set up email and password and sign in with Google, and that's it. Keep it simple. Don't add additional too many options, anything like that. I haven't tested it in Firebase, to be fair and honest, with Supabase, but I'm pretty sure that if I actually enabled magic links in Firebase, it would work out of the box, because everything else I have set up and used with Firebase has worked out of the box for me without any issues, without any additional cost, etc. With Supabase, on the other hand, like I told you, there were a ton of things that didn't work out of the box for me. And when they told me to migrate the database, I was shortly after that slapped with a $50 invoice, because I was now having two databases or two projects set up in Supabase, one, the original one, and the second one, the one that I was cloning or moving to, which I also found a bit ridiculous, because why am I being charged for another project that is just to solve this other issue that you guys created originally? But anyway, you get my point, and you get my vibe with Supabase. Like I said, the business model and the cost and the scalability with Supabase is just not there, and that's why, unfortunately, I can't recommend Supabase for you to build your products and your applications, because I'm not using Supabase myself. Even now that Bolt New has released this new integration with Supabase, I'm not using Supabase, and I don't intend to use Supabase at all with any of my projects or my applications, because I don't want to become invested in Supabase when I already know that it's going to cost me a lot if I start to scale or if I start to build multiple applications. On the flip side, with Firebase, that cost is zero, which is why I love it. Now, obviously, Google will charge you at some point if you start having a lot of traffic to your applications, but that is fair enough in my view. And from what I've seen between the costs between the two, they're pretty much equivalent or less or much less from with Firebase if you get to the point where they actually start charging you. So I guess that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you guys in this episode. Like I said, nothing wrong if you want to use Supabase and you want to get yourself on the Supabase bandwagon, but I would definitely encourage you to think about everything I covered in this episode. And I'm going to add the link here in this episode as well for you to look at the text version of what I covered. And like I said, I recommend Firebase over Supabase because that's what I'm using. And I already explained to you why I'm using that. I'm actually familiar with both products. And after working and testing and building things with both products, I am 100% convinced that Firebase is a much better option than Supabase. All right, guys, I'll see you on the next one. I hope you have a great day, have a great night, or enjoy whatever it is that you're doing right now. All right, Bolding crew, see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.